Hey, welcome back to the channel. I'm Probably Awake, and here are 3 bass tips that you need to know for your production with an ableton. So the first one is actually going to be using the Saturator to make growl sounds. So all I have here is just a stock serum preset. It sounds like this. And basically what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add this saturator. What I'm going to do is in this little wavetable drop down, I'm going to use this sinoid fold. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pump the drive a little bit, and then I'm going to start adjusting this bass knob. So I'm going to pull up my automation here. I'm going to highlight, I'm going to right click, and then I'm going to use one of these shapes. And we can see that this is a pretty drastic shape, but it'll just show you exactly what this does. So this is what it sounds like with the saturator on. You can hear it introduces a lot of new frequencies and a lot of characteristic to the sound in just one plugin. What I'm going to do here though is I'm actually going to drag this back up to the 0 mark, or close as I can. I'll just edit value and I'll put it to 0 here. Same thing with this one. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a little growl pattern like I would in a song. So I'm going to drag this one forward, drag this one forward a little bit too. I'm not going to make them perfect, gives it a little bit more swing. Maybe even drag this one a little bit further backwards. That way it has a little bit more kind of flow to it. And this is what it sounds like now. And then what I can do here is what I'm going to do is double the saturator, or triple it in this case. And then I'm going to group these. And it sounds like this now, without and with. Now by duplicating the saturator, you're adding a lot more distortion to it. You're adding the bass, or this parameter, you're kind of doubling it over time, so it sounds a little bit more gritty, it sounds more harsh. Of course, if you duplicated that again, you can see what the difference is from going from one audio effect rack that just has the 3, so that's what that sounds like, to 6. So that's a little bit too much, but if we actually just duplicate one more, I think that might be cool. You could probably just actually pump up the drive within these saturators as well. It's a little bit different of an effect. Kind of get some like bubbly effect out of that. Maybe I'll just leave this one at 4, and then I will duplicate another one on top of it. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to EQ at the low end, just for some cleanness at the beginning. That actually is going to take off all of our frequency, so we'll do this at the end. So we still get the majority of that. I just don't want it to be super boomy. Okay, so now what we can do is the second thing is use Vocoder to clean up your sounds. So I'm going to drag one in here, and this is what it sounds like just with the stock Vocoder. I have these bands dialed in a little bit, but mostly stock. I'll drag these all back up, and then the first thing I want to do is change these bands. So within Vocoder, you have the option to mess with the formants. You can mess with the release, the attack, of how long the Vocoder is going to stay affected. So if you want to like a long like digital decay. But what I've also been using a lot of is this voicing parameter here. You have a sensitivity, and then how fast the sensitivity is acting. And this really just like doubles the sounds and makes it sound a little bit more robotic, which I like a lot. So I'm going to change this format back to 0. I'll put the depth back to 0 too. This is what we got. Let's go ahead and start dialing the bands down and seeing what kind of tone we can get. That's too little. That's a little bit better. $16 is good. Maybe even let's try 40. That's a little bit too digital. Let's try 16. I want to take out too much of that high end. So let's actually leave this EQ off and just use a vocoder for that. And now what we can do is adjust the depth within the vocoder. So let's just mess around and see what sounds good here. Maybe around the 130% mark. And then of course you have the format here. Let's mess with the release a little bit more. Let's see, let's put the release up a little bit. Leave the attack down. Let's see what the format does here. Let's try 12. And let's dial back the dry wet. Maybe a little bit more. What you can also do is double this and lower this one a negative octave. You get kind of a cool parallel on top of it. And then you can add a saturator on top of that, and then it does the same thing all over again. It kind of has some like digitalism within. But if we actually take a step back, let's go ahead and go back to the first vocoder. And then what I want to do is I want to show you what this voicing parameter does here. So instantly you get kind of like a laser effect. Super, super cool that you can do this within Vocoder, which is just a stock effect in Ableton. So let's dial this back to 50%. I'll leave that voicing there, and we'll use these as kind of like secondary vocoders. I'm going to dial this down an octave. So you can see what that does already. That sounds super cool. Let's dial this one back a little bit too. Let's use a saturator on top of that. Super, super cool. And again, this is just all coming from a saw wave in an initialized serum preset. So super, super cool. Lastly, the third tip is you can create notches and bands and give a sound or a patch or whatever it may be, kind of a vocally talking effect within Ableton and within the EQ. So I'm going to add an EQ here. I'm going to take off this low band, and then what we can do is we can actually group this. I'll pull up the knob or automation here where it gives me the option for the macros. And then what I can do is I'm going to pump these. I'm going to bring the Q up so we can get these notches here. And then what we can do is we can change or modulate this frequency to the macro. So I'm going to press map. I'm going to take the frequency, I'm going to go to map, and then what I'm going to do for the second one, or the third one rather, is I'm going to put it on the map as well. And then now what we do is we can change this minimum, change the maximum, so we don't really need to go that high. We'll offset them a little bit. And now we have two notches that we can mess around with and give it more of a talking sound. So let's put the gain up just for exaggerated effect. And then if we just copy the same automation that our saturator is doing, and then I'm going to bring up the macro 1 automation. I'm going to copy that same modulation. So that's obviously a super exaggerated effect. But if we actually just dial it down, but we change and keep the same movement, and of course you can mess, if we go back into this mapping, you can mess with the frequencies and minimums and how much they're going to be affected so that these notches in here will move at a different rate or different frequencies, whatever you want to make it do. So that's literally just a saw wave, and we added all these things to it. If we group all the audio effects together into one big group, if we turn them all off, it sounds just like this. And if we turn them all on, we get something that sounds like this. So super, super cool. You can literally just duplicate and add many things as you want to in Ableton and get sounds that are super cool. What I'm going to do on top of this, just to keep it going a little bit, is I'm going to add another vocoder, and I'm going to put this vocoder all the way at 100% just to clean up that top end, that messy top end like I was talking about. With that vocoder, it sounds like this. I'm going to change the format to 0. Let's change the bands. So something like 8 sounds cool. And there you go. Now you have the sound cleaned up. It's obviously clipping really, really bad. We can just add a multi-band compression on top of that. Maybe we'll add a saturator on top of that. And there you go. If we go ahead and freeze, we can look at how it looks, the waveform. So we can see obviously it's a lot different from the saw wave. And now you have little growl sounds that you can use in your production. Naturally, if you want to actually make this sound like it's a proper growl with the low end, you can go in here. What I'm going to do again is I'm going to EQ out the low end for this, and then I'll just go into my plugins. I'll grab a sub bass, and then what I'll do is I'll just drag notes that are going to match the sub bass. So let's draw these in here. Remember, we offset that second one, so I'm going to offset that sub a little bit, leave a little bit room on the end, drop it down a couple octaves, and now instead of just having it like this, you have something like this. If you go here and you want to take this step further, we can go in here and we can grab a drum loop, or a group rather. I'll go ahead and just group these together for the sake of the video. I'll go ahead and grab some kickstart. That's just sidechain compression. Put it on the group, change this to half, And now we got something like this. And then if we add the drums, I don't know if that came through. I'm using a different audio system, but hopefully you get the point. With all this being said, those are 3 super quick tips that you can use in your own production. Try these out, see how they work. Saturator is really good for distortion, Vocoder is really good for cleaning up a sound, and then of course EQ is really good for making those notchy vocal sounds. With all this being said, thank you for watching, and we'll see you again in the next video.
2 to the 3 like this.